So what we're going to be working on in today's video is trying to get the Evo 10 back up and running. What the car needs currently is a new oil pump, which we have, and new bearings. Doesn't necessarily need new bearings, but I figured, well, I have the bottom of the motor torn apart. It's pretty easy to get to the crank and rod bearings. It also is very, very late. Currently is 8:00 p.m. and I want to try to get this thing done tonight, just so I can get the oil pan and the cradle sealed back up. The sealant has to dry for quite a while, so if I can get all that buttoned up tonight, the oil pan bolted on and sealed, we should be in luck to dry this thing tomorrow. I do have a meet coming up as well here locally we're throwing. I'm not sure if this video is going to go up before or after. Either way, it is on Saturday night at like 9 or 10 p.m. at Lowe's. So if you guys are in Spokane, you know the typical Lowe's meet on Division. We're going to be there. I'm trying to get the Evo 10 done. No way the FRS is going to get it done, so I figured let's try to get the Evo done and bring it out. So what we're going to do is just jack up the front of this car, get it super high up in the air. I'm going to crawl under there. We got to pull the engine cradle off. Once I get the cradle off, we can get the crank caps and the rod caps off, get all the bearings swapped out. We have a new set of ACL race bearings right here, and then a brand new OEM oil pump. I got my oil pan hot tanked. It's pretty beat up, but I think it's gonna work just fine, as long as it seals, which it should. Yeah, let's get to work, boys. Let's get after it. It's freaking late. We got a monster. We should be able to get this thing done. I don't really know what happened. We kind of got carried away, and this is where we are. I guess we are pulling the motor on this car. The reason why we are most likely pulling the motor, I'm still trying to get that cradle off. So right now we have the timing cover off, valve cover is loose, transmission is loose, and there's still something holding that up. And what I think it is, I'm guessing there's a dowel in the transmission that goes into that cradle, which isn't allowing me to pull the cradle off. So if there's a dowel right there from tranny to cradle, and dowels obviously from the cradle, I don't know why I keep calling it a cradle. That's just what I call it. But from the cradle to the block, then we won't be able to get the cradle off the motor unless either the transmission's removed or we cut the dowels. Being that we're so far deep though, I feel like just yanking the motor out. Pretty much all that's left is the turbo kit and intake. What I think I'm going to try with the intake is kind of what I did with this guy right here. Pull the intake off and kind of just set it to the side with all the wiring connected. I've never tried that before. I don't know if it's going to work. If not, it's not a big deal. But I don't know if I'm going to get this thing out tonight. It's probably like 10:30 or 11, and the shop is a complete freaking disaster. Jesus. The motor is pretty much ready to drop out. The only thing I really have left to do is disconnect the transfer and tranny, and then pull the CV axle and CV stubs out. But I borrowed my slide hammer to somebody. You need a slide hammer to get the CV axle stubs out of the tranny and transfer case. I borrowed that to somebody, and I kind of forgot about it, so I don't have it, and I can't get those CV stubs out without the slide hammer. So this is where we are currently stopping. I really wish I could get that cradle off though, just so I can check out the main bearings and figure out what is going on. But until I get the tranny and motor disconnected, I don't think I can get that cradle off. One thing I have thought about trying, and I've never done before, is pull the motor by itself without the tranny. Because if I was able to do that, then I wouldn't have to disconnect I could leave the tranny, transfer all the CVs in there and everything. It definitely have to come out the top, and I don't know if that's possible, just because there's not really a lot of space on that side. Going back in, 100% not possible because I'd have the timing cover on. But I think I'm just going to hold off till the morning to get that slide hammer. And yeah, we can finish up. Shop's a disaster, but it's all good. We got the turbo kit off. Fatty turbo chilling over there. Yeah. Let's call it a night, boys. So here's the scoop. I don't have a way to get the slide hammer I need from my buddy. He lives like an hour and a half away. So I'm just going to go run and grab one from AutoZone real quick. They loan them out. I think it's like $40. And then when you return, you get your money back. So go grab that, and then we should be able to get this motor and tranny assembly pulled out. So there's two different scenarios that are going on in my head as to why this motor is having issues. The first thing that I thought was a possible cause was maybe I didn't prime the oil pump properly. When I built that motor, I took the oil pump out, I got it all cleaned out, and I did pack it full of assembly lube. I'm not exactly sure if that was the cause. The reason I think that is because, number one, the oil pump wear maybe kind of think that it was ran dry for a split second when I first started up the motor. Number two is, remember when we first started up the motor, when it was brand freaking new, we had low oil pressure for a little bit. That makes me think that maybe the oil pump was still dry at that time. So I'm gonna have to do some reading. If you guys know like the proper oil pump bleeding procedure for an Evo. I don't know if it'd be different than any other car, but all I've ever done in the past was just pack it full of assembly lube and it's been fine. So there's that. And then second thing that I never once told you guys about. So when we built this motor, I'll try to make this fast, guys, then we can get back to work. We put a brand new clutch in here, right? So when we put the new clutch in there, taking out the old one, putting in the new one, it's thicker, which caused the master cylinder pin to go back into the master cylinder more, which in turn caused more fluid to be in the reservoir. When I would go drive the car, I would push in the clutch, and every single time I pushed in the clutch, the motor would die. I finally traced it down to being the reservoir was fully maxed out on fluid. There was nowhere for the fluid to go. What I realized last night is that crank has a lot of side-to-side play in it, meaning the crank was walking. If that was the case, obviously the rest of the main bearings are probably going to be worn as well. And why I think the crank had play in it, say if you push the clutch, the fluid reservoir is topped off, it's going to put a bunch of pressure on the crank as well, which in turn puts a bunch of pressure on the thrust bearings. The thrust bearings are what hold the crank from turning or flopping side to side in a motor. So if it puts all that pressure on the thrust bearings, they're going to get worn out, and I think that is what caused the play. All right, we got the motor out. Let's flip this thing over and pull that cradle off, and we can pull all the bearings out, check them out, see what the hell is going on with this thing. Oh, jeez. I don't know how this thing still ran. Thrust is gone. Okay, we got the motor apart. The thrust bearing on this motor went out. I'll explain it here in a minute, but so far the damage includes the block is probably shot because we have a bunch of wear right there. This crank cap is shot as well. Crank is destroyed. Obviously all the bearings are pretty messed up as well. I'm gonna go ahead, clean up the shop a bit. As you can see, it's a disaster. I've already started cleaning up a little bit, but I'm gonna finish cleaning up and then we can talk about what exactly happened, because this is no good. All right, so let me briefly explain what went down. We built a new motor, we put a new clutch in the car. At that time when I put the new clutch in, got the car 100% done, started it, drove it, ran fine. The only problem I was having is every time I pushed in the clutch, the motor would die. Basically what that was causing, I kind of already explained it earlier. The reservoir was full, so every time we pushed in the clutch, it'd create so much pressure on the crank itself, like pushing it against that thrust bearing, that the motor would die. I didn't notice that the reservoir was full right away, so I probably put honestly like 150, 200 miles on the motor like that. So all that wear over those 150, 200 miles on that thrust bearing completely destroyed the thrust bearing. I'm honestly surprised it lasted as long as it did without just completely grenading itself. So as of right now, very long parts list we need. Crank is completely shot, block is shot, the crank cap was shot. I think the rods and pistons are still good. I hope everything in the top end is good as well, but obviously when you have a major bearing failure like that, copper just goes throughout the whole motor. And I'm honestly surprised that there wasn't more copper in the oil filter when we pulled it apart the other day. As of right now, I don't really know what we're gonna do with this build. I have really two options. Number one is do a whole 100% rebuild on this motor once again, get a new crank, get a new block and all that stuff, and learn from my mistakes. Number two, buy a stock motor, put the car back to stock, and just get rid of it because we are so deeply invested in this car right now. It's like so much money is going into this thing, especially with this build now. This is easily a $5,000 project, easily. It's probably gonna be well over 5K if I decided to have a fully built motor again. So I honestly don't really know what to do. It is currently July 4th. Everybody's waiting on me, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this video right here. Learn from my mistakes, guys. There's a reason why they say bleed your clutch when you put a new clutch in the car. Not only is it for air bubbles that could be in there, but obviously when you go from a worn out clutch to a brand new clutch, all that fluid pushes back up into the reservoir. So yeah, learn from my mistakes. Don't do what I did. This is literally a 10-second thing I could have checked, and I decided not to for whatever reason. The whole build was kind of rushed just because I know it could have been avoided when we had that detonation issue. So I think that's where it all stemmed from. It's just being pissed off at me the whole time when I was building it, and it just led to a catastrophic failure once again. Could have been a very, very simple fix if I would have caught it right away, but unfortunately it is what it is. If there's one thing you guys can take away from this video is please learn from my mistakes. take your time when you're building a motor. The motor was built properly. It was just the simple fact that I did not bleed the clutch when I put a new clutch in there. And if I would have bled the clutch, of course I would have noticed that it's way too full on the reservoir. So yeah, pretty shitty situation, but we can move on. We can move on with the life. Stay tuned on the channel to figure out what we're gonna do with this car. Either put it back to stock and sell it, or do a full build once again. And if I build it this time, I think I'm gonna do a lot more. Probably some port work, maybe valves, maybe cams. Who knows? We'll see. Happy 4th of July, guys. Peace out. Enjoy your 4th. Don't drink and drive. I'll see you guys in the next video.